Thank you. Hello, my question is regarding some of the statements that President Obama made earlier in the year regarding clean tech. So whoever can dominate this space will have a dominant, continue to have a dominant role, or will have a dominant role globally. So one of the recent experiences that I've had with a group of people that are willing to start a venture is that we're actually trying to develop a new IP around an energy storage solution. Bottoms up, targeting emerging economies. Bottoms up, targeting small-scale energy systems. Bottoms up, it's targeting distributed energy frameworks. With that said, interestingly enough, so far our conversation with investors is to raise the eyebrow as to why we would look at emerging markets first versus the United States. And so really the question to the panel is twofold. First is, if we know that it's the emerging economies that are growing, that's where the investment is going, that's where the growth is, why aren't we more open-minded to investing in new technologies targeting their energy infrastructure, which is vital to support their growth? And second, what could we do in the Bay Area to support that mindset? Those are the two questions.
I can take a shot at that. It's really it's a business choice. Businesses, private people are investing, and they're going to go where they see the opportunity, and that's why so many companies from here are investing heavily through R&D centers and market development in these very, very large emerging economies. So I don't think it's a national policy thing. It's where the market growth is. You go where the money is, and there's a very large market for these technologies here. I think companies are seeing that there is also a very large market developing in these other countries. Now, the tricky part, I think, is that what we develop here is, for the most part, pretty expensive. These technologies aren't cheap to begin with, generally. We have a very high cost structure here in the U.S. and California, so it's a difficult proposition to say we developed this really cool technology to do something, and now we're just going to drop it in China or India or Brazil and buy this thing because their cost structures are so different. And if you look at like rural area, my gosh, a lot of people living on $1 a day still, and so they're not going to buy this stuff. However, where some of the opportunity is, I think first it would be a mistake to believe that because China and Brazil resisted mandatory global targets on CO2 emissions, that doesn't mean that they're not committed to and more engaged in developing renewable energy technologies and implementing policies designed to shift their economies away from carbon fuels. They've got perfectly good reasons to do it anyway, because they need to reduce their dependence on imported oil. They're heavily dependent. And so it's a national security proposition. It's an economic proposition. I think actually on the part of the Chinese, they're very strategic folks. I think they would like to develop a powerful renewable energy technology industry in China and start to export it themselves. And so for a whole variety of reasons, they're doing it there. And we shouldn't kid ourselves that because they kind of walked away really in Copenhagen that they're not actually focused on these issues. So there will be markets in those countries. There'll be pretty competitive markets. And we ought to be focusing on those markets because A, there are markets, people are going to be buying stuff, but also if we can get the right technologies implemented there, then we're all getting toward these broader global goals regarding climate change and reducing CO2 emissions, so that even if we don't have an effective global agreement, I personally think the way to get there is, don't forget global negotiations. They're good and you want standards and targets, but I think companies and communities and countries are marching that direction already for a whole variety of reasons, global negotiations aside. Whether they're marching fast enough is another question, but a lot of them are moving that way. So the opportunity, unique one, say with China and India, is they've got a lot of smart people. I think about India now especially. Brilliant engineers as good as ours. They've got these different cost structures, so they've proven themselves to be very, very good at coming up with ideas. How do you apply a technology or an idea in a place with relatively low amount of disposable income? And how do you get solar distributed at very low cost to villages? How do you get a stove used in villages that isn't going to emit tons of carbon or soot by burning biomass? And they're actually doing it. So one of the opportunities is if you can develop a technology here or develop it in partnership with, say, counterparts in India, have it deployed in India, because a lot of our companies now, especially in tech, are using India as a test bed for products to be used throughout the developing world. If you can develop it in India, you can sell it almost anywhere in the developing and emerging economy world. If you can do that there, arguably, you could bring that back to the U.S. Clean energy technologies that are perhaps much more cost-effective than what we have today.
Thank you.
Just to follow up very briefly, it's a very interesting question that you just asked, and I was initially thinking the answer could just be, time will tell, because the difference I've noticed, not just in China, but more recently even in India, is waking up in the last 5 to 6 years, much more so than the prior 15 years of the reforms, of the critical need for infrastructural development in India, because that is the single biggest bottleneck in India right now is electricity generation, ports capacity, roads, and so on. And parallel with that is the waking up of this alternative energy sector, whether it's companies like Suzlon, which have come from nowhere, and if you Google them, you see how well they've done. So both countries, China and India, have woken up to this idea of the energy needs for their own domestic economy, but to do it in a manner that's cost effective, as Sean said. And so I think it is really opening up a huge window of opportunity for American entrepreneurs and investors in this area to satisfy a growing demand across the spectrum, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's even things like different kinds of how you produce a solar or how you use the wind. It's fascinating just talking to the entrepreneurs who are coming up with these technologies, but they're still, I would say, a bit nascent. But give it 2 years, things will change dramatically in this landscape. And I wouldn't have said this maybe 5 years ago vis-a-vis India. So.
Just to add a couple of one or two data points. Foreign companies had over 70%, like about 77% of the China market for wind energy in 2004, and it was 20% and heading much lower by 2008. The companies were led by European companies, Gamesa from Spain, Vestas from Denmark, Siemens was involved, Suzlon from India, GE, and the Chinese have developed their own industry. The product is much less expensive. The foreigners would say, well, wait a minute, our technology is superior, it lasts longer, and the Chinese response is, but we're buying on the basis of price for acquisition, not for necessarily, and we write our own bid specifications, not necessarily to last for decades. So it's going to become an issue. Solar, the Chinese have really moved dramatically ahead, and to the extent where, as Dawei Chang would point out, the Germans are threatening anti-dumping duties on Chinese solar panels. 95% of Chinese solar photovoltaics are exported. And part of the reason is the domestic market hasn't developed quickly enough. And it's also not grid connected. It is distributed. And so it's a tremendous benefit for villages in the west of the country, particularly, where there was no grid. And it's a boom to China. But it is not likely to be a great market for developed countries with higher cost base, as Sean said.
I could just throw a couple of the quick data points in there too. I think a lot of these issues come together in urbanization, so you almost have two markets. Think of India for a moment. You've got the rural market, where there's a particular cost structure, very low. You've got the urban market, where India has more fast-growing cities than anywhere in the world. UN says that there will be 200 million people moving in Indian cities between 2007 and 2035. That's half the population of the U.S. And right now, India, despite the big cities, is a rural country. It will be 50% urban by that time. So massive urbanization, which brings into focus a lot of these technological requirements. So we have companies here from here in California like AECOM that are building multiple metros across India, big infrastructure market. We've got architecture and urban design firms from here that are extremely active in China. They're getting much of the revenues from China, designing mega cities, are now starting to look at India. You have opportunities for companies involved in water, which is a huge issue, building standards, building materials, lots of focus now in India on LEED building and energy efficient building, so lots of practical opportunity around urbanization. Quick data point, Chinese solar companies, there's a small wave of Chinese solar companies coming to investing in California. I think they see the California market as being significant, driven by policy to a large degree. Last count, I think 7 have established offices now in the San Francisco Bay Area. Several are looking to produce solar panels here because they're kind of costly to ship. So that may be a trend. And finally, on broader climate stuff, watch out for one issue. It may come down the pipe, which is there has been talk rumbling around Congress the last couple of years of imposing, in effect, a carbon tax on trade. So if a company in another country uses production processes that emit what are deemed to be excessive carbon levels, those could be taxed. Whoa. You start to do that, that's a big wrinkle in the trading system, because of course if you talk to China and India, they would argue that, well, no, it's not our absolute emission levels, it's our per capita emissions. You get into those arguments. But there are people in Congress who are developing this idea, and something to watch out for. And finally, on a more positive note, in the Bay Area, we've benefited fantastically from international free trade in information technology. No matter what country in the world it is, whether it's China or Botswana, our number one export is IT. So we talk about climate change. We couldn't get it done through Copenhagen. We all want to see something happen. Why not have a global free trade agreement in clean tech? Now, of course, other countries will, maybe the Indians would say, well, that's good or bad for Suzlon, but you get into all these negotiations. But if you think about something that would benefit so many countries and meet a variety of goals, and it's something we actually do better here, at least on the R&D level than anywhere in the world, why not free trade in clean tech?
Thank you. Well, it's time for me to close the panel. Even though I still have several questions to ask the panel, but I guess I have to hold the question for a later time. Now, please join me again to thank for wonderful panelists for their